Welcome to Let's Talk Recovery Equity, a series of conversations about how we can reach and help more people find freedom from addiction. Our series offers us a space to reflect on some of the complexities of substance use disorder and other mental health conditions, and to discuss new pathways to hope, recovery, and healing. My name is Andrew Williams, and I serve as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation, and I am the host of our series. Today, I'm excited and honored to welcome Richard Wright to our Recovery Equity series. Richard Wright is an elder of the Leech Lake band of Ojibwe who has worked as an alcohol and drug counselor for 20 plus years. He's earned degrees from Minneapolis Community College, the University of Minnesota, and the St. Paul Seminary. He entered our field in 1986, working primarily in residential settings for American Indian children and later adults. Although retired, Mr. Wright continues to involve himself with policy and the development of culturally specific treatment modalities at all levels of care. Dr. Wright is also the author of The Way of Our People, published by the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation. Welcome, Mr. Wright, to Let's Talk Recovery Equity. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Again, Andrew, thank you for inviting me.
All right. Well, I'd like to start by giving our audience a chance to get to know you a little bit better. So if you could, please introduce yourself, including where you're from, maybe share some about your tribal identity and what that means to you, and please share with us, your pathway toward the work that you've been doing, the healing work you've been doing in Native communities in Minnesota.
Yeah. First, if I could offer just a transparency here. While I do appreciate the title, the designation for doctor, I am not a doctor. So although I have been in the field long enough, I suppose I have earned enough community or continuing education units for that, but I have not earned that honor. So the D is a reference to Donald. Donald is my first name, Richard is my middle name, and Wright is my last name. It is true, I grew up in Walker, Minnesota. I was raised in Onion, which is right across the bay from Walker. And this was in the early 50s, so it's been a while since I've returned to my reservation, but I do go back periodically. And I left there the day after I graduated from Walker High School, and actually traveled to the Twin City, and I wanted to see the world, but I didn't have any money to do that. And so, what opportunity took hold when I was walking by the recruitment station one day, and I saw this huge sign that says, Uncle Sam wants you, see the world, right? And the light bulb went off of my head, and I said, well, that'll be it then. So I went in there and I enlisted. Back then, that was the Vietnam War era, and it was either be that you could enlist as regular Army, or you could be drafted. Those were the two choices for young men back then. So I chose to go in regular Army, and I spent 3 years there. And when I returned, I entered the University of Minnesota and continued there up until about 1975, when I went back to my reservation and entered the then Bemidji State University and continued my studies there, which took me into the corrections field. I started to do some internship with Hennepin County District Court. And that was where the days of when we were looking at the response systems for the district court. One of the disparities was that there were no American Indian probation officers. And in a sense, I became the first one. We could call that affirmative action or whatever. So I started to work in adult probation and did that for a few years until about 1986. I went through a life change myself. And I decided at that time that I wasn't going to continue my life as it was going, which involved a lot of the use of alcohol. And one day I just said simply, I've had enough. I'm done. I'm done. And I was actually sitting at a bar with a drink that was in front of me, and I left the drink there and I walked out. And I lived up to that since that day. Don't get me wrong, I tried treatment many times. I was there 5 times. It didn't work, at least not for me. But it did provide me with a lot of different kinds of experiences about what treatment was for an American Indian man. And I entered those treatment programs as an American Indian man that was strong in the Ojibwe culture, that knew a little bit about my language yet. And I started to work in a treatment program right here in South Minneapolis, back then referred to as Eden House, which is our S. Eden programs. That's where I completed my internship for to be certified, as back then all that was required was the 18-month certification in Minneapolis Community College. That's the name of it back then. And so I was credentialed through the Institute for Chemical Dependency Professionals, which allowed me to enter the field at Eaton House and become a CD counselor, which I did. And later on, there were other requirements that were established by DHS, which required even more education, plus an LABC, which I managed to get that, and continued my work at Eden House until one day I was looking at the internet and decided to look at Hazelton Betty Thorpe Foundation website, and Lord and behold, there was a position that was open there, which actually required a master's degree. But I said, I think I'm going to put in for that and just see where it goes with that. And so I applied, and I actually interviewed twice, and I turned them down. They offered me so much money, I couldn't turn that down, and that's how I ended up at Betty Ford Hazelton Foundation, which was a great place to work. And since then, I've been back on different occasions, actually doing what they do. I think a lot of is they have training programs, master level training programs for LNBC. And so I go back there occasionally and teach culturally specific diversity when it comes to treating the American Indian people. I've done a lot of work on Minnesota Indian reservations. There's 11 of them. There's 4 Sioux reservations in the lower third of Minnesota and 7 Ojibwe Indian reservations in Minnesota. And we have what we call an American Indian Advisory Council, which is through DHS, the state of Minnesota. And I joined that group and then later became its chairman. And which that whole council was made up of about 18 people that represented all of the 11 Indian reservations, including urban areas that had high density populations such as Duluth and International Falls. And so it was a representation of people that were striving to find better ways to serve the American Indian people when it comes to substance use disorders. And I continue to work within the DHS or Minnesota systems, including March, became part of the governors for a while. Also taught at the March conference at various levels. And so I've been doing a lot of policy work up until now. I've helped to establish 2 intensive outpatient programs here for American Indian people. One is in St. Paul, and the other one is right here where I work now, the Indian Health Board. So we have two programs as a result of my input. All of that input is representative of what you see right here in my office. And you see the big drum behind me. And that's one of the really strong cultural specific teachings that we like to offer the American Indian, because we are a culture that is very spiritually strong. Spiritually strong in a sense that we talk about medicines, not in the pharmaceutical sense, but what does medicine do for us that gives us a sense of good spiritualism reaction to what's going on with us. Number one, if we walk into an American Indian intensive outpatient program or any residential program, you're going to hear the presence of that drum there. Either whoever's in residence there is going to be singing on that drum in the morning. You're going to walk in there and you're going to smell the sage being burned in there. And you're going to smell the cedar being burned, maybe the sweetgrass, and you're going to hear singing in there. And those are one of the strongest components of I like to say, sovereignty that I became aware of as we started to develop programs on the reservations and in the urban areas. How do we work along with VHS and establish culturally specific programming for American Indian people? And culturally specific takes on a definition that does include that when we have an outpatient program that's culturally based, at least 51% of the staff need to be American Indian, or 51% have to be on the board of directors. And so in using that culturally specific statute, we've come to realize that we really need to establish sovereignty in Minnesota and what it means to the American Indian tribes that exist here. We need to establish what we would call 94-638 programs, which is through the Indian Health Service, which is a federal agency. And what it means is that the American Indian people have very unique needs when it comes to treating substance use disorder. If you look at the propensity, what the trends are for what's being used out there and who's using them, the American Indian sits right at the top. One of the highest affected populations in the whole state. And we want to find a way to address that in a more realistic way. We want to be able to heal the people when it comes to how do they heal spiritually. Like I had alluded to, I have worked in different residential care programs, and I have benefited from learning about their system responses, and I certainly have taught it over the years. And for some people, it works. It does work. I can't take that away from people who've experienced sobriety by using that 12-step philosophy.
Yes. Mr. Wright, I so appreciate your rich response, and just want to note and want to ask you a couple of follow-up questions on all that you've shared. And first, I want to articulate my appreciation for your service to our country as a veteran. And I also want to thank you for what I feel like was a really kind of instructive and important explanation of what it means to offer culturally specific, right, SUD treatment to Native communities. That was one of the questions I had, because I noted, right, that as you served, as the chair of the American Indian Advisory Council, that you did recommend that each tribe, right, pursue culturally specific modalities of treatment. And I think you've done a wonderful job of giving us a window into what that means for Native people. I don't know if you want to elaborate more on that notion of sovereignty that you just kind of introduced, or to say anything more about the contours of a culturally specific approach. And I know you've done some work, right, trying to integrate the 12-step model, with these traditional healing modalities within the Native community. I don't know if you'd like to speak to that any further.
Yes, I would. And you know what I see is really some advances that are really helping the American Indian is the change from Rule 25 into comprehensive assessment, which allows us to get a better look. It allows us to tell a story about who is that person that's sitting on the other side of the desk from us, right? And so we talk about, well, where are you from? Or what reservation are you from? What clan are you from? What band are you from? Do you practice your traditions? Have you practiced your traditions? Do you go wild rice harvesting? Do you go whitefish netting? Do you have the deer camps? Do you go out to sugar bush? All of these things are cultural considerations that traditional tribal people have experienced. But I think one of the closest job that we have to us as American Indian people is our language, right? Our language defines who we are as Indian people. If you were to consider that I am, yes, my name is Donald Richard Wright, but in reality, when I go back to the reservation, I'm also called Wisag, right? And that's my Indian name. And the Indian name helps to define who we are and our path in this life, and really helps us to bring us to a point where we are doing what our name implies. Wisag is actually a product that all of us use here every day, and that's a pepper that you put on your food, right? It's also a medicine. If we look at it, it helps our food to taste better, but we really look at the healing properties of what goes on into the ground and what chemicals it extracts from the ground. And in some senses, that wood is used as a medicine. It helps to heal. And in fact, that's what I think I've become. I've helped people to heal. And that's currently my position here at the Indian Health Board. I continue to maintain my credentials as I'm supposed to, but I'm now a spiritual helper, right? I help to heal, and part of that is that I do continue to consult with tribal governments. One of those is I work with the Mille Lacs Indian Reservation, for example, and I do what we call peer review. I'll go look at their operations and I really take a strong look at them and I say, are you really doing what your abstract says that you're going to provide to the patients that enter your program? And it's not a licensing visit, but it is like an audit. And say, well, maybe we need to beef things up here. It's just a preparation of assurances that our people are getting the best opportunity available to them. Tribal sovereignty is exactly that. It's allowing the American Indian tribes in Minnesota to take over the operations of what it is like for substance use disorder programs to exist on their reservation. A comprehensive assessment that I talked about allows us to look at what the Ojibwe people would use in our own language is a word that we really can't define, but the word is Nichimowinja. What's going on with you, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell this man that, based on what you told me here, it says in the book that you're an alcoholic, right? So it's a negative response that I provide for them. I say, Nichimowinja, this thing that's going on with you is getting the best of you. Gather your helpers. Gather your LADCs, gather your mental health therapists, gather the probation officer, the child protection worker, all of those people that are involved in your life, they can help you if you want them to help you, right? It's a real comprehensive look of what's impacted that person. One of the things that I really would like to see changed in regards to our tribal sovereignty is we do not have enough resources to treat our tribal members. We send them off or even out of Minnesota to be treated, and then we bring them back to the reservation. And that's where the work really starts. And now they can sit in an aesthetic environment for 120 days or whatever, but then they come back to that same environment where they got sick in the first place, right? I'd like to see our reservations treat exactly where they got sick. And that's part of the reason why I was able to do what I did. I did not leave Minneapolis South Side area. I looked to those people that I drank with on Franklin Avenue. In fact, I put a boundary on them, and I said, I can't drink with you guys anymore. I said, I just can't do it, and I'm not going to do that. And those are the same guys that when I encountered them on the street, they would often yell out to me, say, hey, Richard, are you still sober? And I would say, yeah. And they go, hey, all right, brother, all right. And then they would say, I wish I was like you. And I'd say, you are. Look, see, we're the same color. You're my brother. And I didn't leave you just because you're taking. I'm here just to sit beside you and enable your spirit to feel good about where you're at. I'm not saying that you're an alcoholic. I'm not saying that you're a drunk. I'm just saying that you're my brother. And I really want to help you with that if I'm able to. I don't impose myself on them, and I just offer them my existence to sit beside them and be non-judgmental to what they are doing. And that was one of the basis for the book that I wrote, of our people. It's a spiritual collection of those stories.
Yes, and I have it here, right here, Mr. Wright, and I had some questions for you around your motivation and inspiration for that, but we're quickly running out of time. We never have enough time for these interviews, and if I can maybe ask you one other follow-up question before we have to close out. First, I want to say how much I appreciate you helping enhance our understanding of the significance of sovereignty and culture, and language is a part of culture, right? In sort of our approach to offering more hope and healing in Native communities. And that really important point that language is much more than, right, a mode of communication, but represents a whole world view, and it's connected to a sense of community and self-identity. As you say, it's essential that that's incorporated into, right, these culturally specific healing modalities. I've had the good fortune in my time here at the Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation to work at our Plymouth youth site. And I noted in looking at your background that you spent a lot of time working with Native young people. And I'm wondering if you could share with our audience some of what you learned about some of the unique challenges and needs of American Indian youth and how we can support them in moving toward hope and healing as well.
Yeah, actually, that was my attraction to entering this field, was working with teenagers that were experiencing substance use. And those were really young children, as young as 11 years old, and they don't fit into the licensing criteria of being admitted to programs. So we have to seek variances for a lot of these young people. But you know what? One of the judgments that I made, and I admit it, is that I'd like to not put this little child in treatment. I'd like to put the parents in treatment. Because what they're doing is because of what's going on at home, right? Yeah. When they face special challenges, a lot of them want to get into things that maybe are controversial and illegal, and they get into trouble for that. And one of the care pieces that we did within that youth program that I initially started to volunteer in before I was hired there was I took them out on social activities. We would take them on the boat and go canoeing for 3 days, or we would take them horseback riding, and they just enjoyed themselves. And they were tough, in-your-face kinds of kids that were out there laughing and even crying because they weren't able to run with the horses. They were scared and things like that, and just being there with them and helping them to engage themselves in their own strengths, right? That's what the drive is, to work with these young people. And it's today. I continue to work with young people. But you know what? The field is kind of closed on that ever since managed care came into existence in the early 90s. We're not able to help the adolescent as much as we would like to. And we're doing that with the funders and what they're willing to do also for adolescents. And we're seeing that in the comprehensive assessments, and we have to label them. We have to provide a diagnosis on what it is we think they have based on what they're telling us. And that's always a topic of controversy. Can they be an alcoholic at 11 years old, or experiencing drug use because they see it happen, right? Or maybe it's peer pressure or something like that. It's experimental, one of those aspects of going through life that I think a lot of us had to do when we were growing up younger and were experienced to the street culture. It's all there. It was all there for us. That's a controversy that I lean more towards that word Ojibwe and Leland. I lean more to that. What I found out was that a lot of these young people, they were functioning academically. If they were in the 10th grade, they had a third grade level of reading and comprehension, right? So bringing that back up to their level, their grade level, helping them all through that. There's kids that even today, when I see them, they'll come up to me and they'll say, "Hey, Richard, I have a car. I got married. I got kids. I'm doing all this, right? Thanks for helping me."
Yes, no, thank you so much for that response. I really wish I did not have to close out our time together. Maybe we'll have to explore part two, but I do want to wrap up with the one question we always end with all of our guests. And that is, what sort of piece of wisdom, what do you have to share with anyone in a Native community now, or even beyond Native communities, who's really struggling with substance use disorder or has a family member or friend who is? Do you have any words to share with them?
Yeah, yes, I do. And when I sit in this building here and look out on Franklin Avenue, and I see what Franklin Avenue is representative of, is what's going on with our Indian people out there. It's all evident there, and a lot of Indian community leaders have gotten together and they've asked themselves, what can we do? And it's a discussion that a lot of times we walk away in frustration because we don't know what to do. I think that when we talk about these ones that are out there being homeless and that they're using all the trend because they're accessible, is that we extend our outreach to them even more so, to let them know that we're here, to provide resources and to say, well, if you want to go to a homeless shelter tonight, then let's do that, right? Let's just start there, right? And let's wake up in the morning and see where we want to go from there, right? But I think it's recognizing them as spiritual people without being judgmental to them, accepting them as they are, and what it is that they're doing, because we know we're not going to change them. They have to realize that change needs to come from in here. The whole basis of that drum back there is that's who we are. It's our heart speaking to us. They know what reasoning is. They know what affects them good, what affects them best. They can do that in a virtuous way and come to a decision that, well, yeah, I can drop what I'm doing, and I can back and do what I'm supposed to do, right?
Thank you so much, Richard, for that response. And really, for those of us, especially like myself, who live right here in Minneapolis and traverse South Minneapolis often daily, I really appreciate, your prompt to us, your call for us not to turn our head away from that, not to allow, our Native brothers and sisters on Franklin, right, to become invisible and for us to become indifferent. And, part of what I hear in your response as well is that, this challenge to us to see them not just with our eyes, but to see them with our hearts, right?
Yes.
And to see the common humanity that we share with them, and to see the spirit that's within them, which is, of course, that foundation and source of hope and healing. Well, to all of you listening or watching today, I want to express my gratitude for taking the time to join us for this very important and rich conversation. Mr. Wright, I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, and tremendous insights. We are grateful for the advocacy and the life-changing healing work you do each day. So thank you again, Mr. Wright, for joining us today. I look forward to us getting better connected here in the months ahead. And for everyone again out there, we hope that you'll let your friends and colleagues know about our Let's Talk Recovery Equity conversations. And please come back often to catch more episodes of Let's Talk Recovery Equity. Together, we can advance recovery equity for all those in need as we change how the world thinks about addiction. Thank you.